Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this special live webinar event hosted by the Center for the Studies of Peace, Conflict, and Well-Being in partnership with the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre. We are due to begin the event at 6:30 South African time. So please allow us just 1 or 2 more minutes while we allow people in the Zoom. So please just be patient with us. We are expecting an audience tonight, and we would like to begin the event with as many people present as possible. So please just give us those few minutes as our team allows people into the Zoom. My name is Mdunduli, and I'm from the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre. I hope that today was a good day for you. And I would like to just share some housekeeping rules before I officially begin the event. Please make sure that your sound is on mute throughout the event so that we don't have any background noises that interfere with tonight's presentation. So please be so kind as to make sure that your sound is on mute. For those of you who may not be familiar with how to mute your sound, there's a microphone icon at the bottom of your screen. So if you just click on that and there's a red dash across the microphone icon, it means your sound is on mute. So please make sure that it stays that way. However, I do encourage you to use the chat function throughout the event to post your questions and comments to our speakers. And our team will gather those questions and comments throughout the event and present them to our speakers when we have our question and answer session. Also, please be aware that this event is being recorded. So if you do not wish to appear on camera, please just cut your video so that you don't appear on camera. However, if you are comfortable with appearing on camera, by all means, you are most welcome to keep your video on. So I'll just wait 1 more minute before I officially begin so that we can have as many people present as possible. However, we do have people joining us from various parts of the world. So in fact, would you be so kind to let us know where you are joining us from? I know we have people joining us from Rwanda. I know we have people joining us from Mozambique. I'm coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre. So please just use the chat function just to write the name of your city and country from where you are joining us. Would really appreciate that so much. It's always wonderful to know how many countries and how many cities are represented at our events. So let's see, maybe some people have told us already where they're joining us from. If we read the chat function, yes, if people are still writing and still letting us know where they're joining us from. So as soon as I have more messages from people, I'll mention a few people and the different countries and cities that are represented at this event. It is now 32 minutes past 6 p.m. South African time. We have Daniela from the Center for the Studies of Peace, Conflict, and Well-Being joining us in Mozambique. Hello, Daniela, welcome. Thank you. I'll wait maybe 1 more minute. We have Ludmila also joining us from Mozambique. Welcome, Ludmila. And people are joining us very quickly now. So the audience is growing quite quickly. 1 more minute, I'll wait, just 1 more minute, and then I'll officially begin the event. So we have Salva, who's joining us from Mozambique, it says. We have Melanie also who's joining us from Maputo. So we have quite a few people joining us from Mozambique today. That's very, very exciting. We have Tali Nates joining us from Johannesburg. So it is now 34 minutes past 6 p.m. South African time. So I will begin. So for those of you who've just joined us, welcome. My name is Mdunduli, and I'm coming to you live from the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre. And welcome to this live webinar event hosted by the Center for the Studies of Peace, Conflict, and Well-being in partnership with the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre. Just to repeat the housekeeping rules that I mentioned for those of you who've just joined us, please make sure that your sound is on mute throughout the event so that we don't have any background noises that interfere with tonight's presentations. However, I do encourage you to use the chat function to communicate with us. If you have any technical problems, please use the chat function to communicate those with us. But also please send your questions and your comments for our speakers. Throughout the event, our team will collect those questions and comments and then present them to our speakers during the question and answer session. So please stay until the end of the event so that you can be part of that question and answer session. Also, please be aware that this event is being recorded. So if you wish to hide your face, if you do not wish to appear on camera, please just cut your video. Tonight's event will be a discussion on shaping the material conditions of political and economic inclusion in countries like Mozambique, South Africa, and Rwanda. Also provides historical examples of how narratives, memories, and active othering has led to episodes of violence, social or political, and the methods used by societal leaders to create positive frames of reference. So this proves to be a very deep, but also very interesting and fruitful discussion that I think many of us will benefit from listening to. And tonight's panelists who will be speaking to us are Tali Nates, who is the founder and executive director of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre, Mr. Jorge Jairoce, I hope I was able to pronounce that correctly, and Mr. Jorge is the permanent secretary at the Ministry of Industry and Commerce in Mozambique. And Mr. Jorge also has a PhD in history from the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul and is a teacher at the Maputo Pedagogic University. And then we also have Mr. Freddy Mutanguha, who is the executive director of the Aegis Trust in Kigali in Rwanda, and also the director of the Kigali Genocide Memorial, as well as being a survivor of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. And lastly, we will have Mr. Milisau Nuvunga, who is the executive director at the Center for the Studies of Peace, Conflict, and Well-being in Maputo in Mozambique. So those will be the panelists in tonight's discussion, and Mr. Nuvunga will moderate the question and answer session. Without any further ado, I would like to present to you Mr. Freddy Mutanguha to please address us.
So thank you very much for a very good introduction, and thank you very much to everyone who is listening to me, and I think and I hope this will be a very good discussion that people will inspire from. As you mentioned, Dudu, I'm Freddy Mutanguha, Executive Director of Aegis Trust, and I was very pleased to be part of these discussions, and what I'm going to talk about today, and I will try to give a little bit background and responding to your question on how a narrative and memory and active othering have led to violence. In case of Rwanda is genocide, and also how we try to overcome and build a positive society, and that's going toward unity again and in Rwanda. So let me start with the background, the Society of Rwandans, and how Rwandans' history. In Rwanda, since centuries, Rwanda was inhabited of three people. We had, I will show you my, I'm going to show you my my screen if you don't mind. And I hope everyone can see my screen this time. 1 second, just doing this. Right. Oh, okay. Oh. Sorry, 1 second. Right, just going down like this. This is my screen. I hope everyone can see.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm not going to talk where Rwanda is. Everyone probably can know it. This is in Africa. So we are talking about Rwanda being inhabited of 3 people. We had Tutsi, this for centuries. We had Twa and the Hutus, the Tutsi being cattle herders, and the Hutu, the farmers, and the Twa, they were people living with fruit gathering and hunting in the forests. And this have been a complementarity between these three categories of people, and they were all based on economic style on how people used to live. And this is actually those 3 categories of people. They shared everything. They had one culture, they had one religion, and they had one language, and they were far to be called races or ethnicity. That was and from that period of time. As you know, in the 18th century, 19th centuries, and 20th centuries, and Africa had been colonized, and Rwanda was the first colonizers to Rwanda were they were Germans, and replaced in the First World War by the Belgians, and since that time, they found the society of Rwanda so cohesive, and they were living in harmony. And that was that time that with colonial politics of rule, divide and rule, that what will actually based on a socio-economic style actually become more racist. They used the studies around anthropology, and they tried to say that Tutsi and Twa and the Hutus, they're not the same people. They came from different areas of Africa and Asia. So that's how the idea of the differences between the 3 categories of people actually came about. Yes, we had different. We are human beings. We had our differences. We had our conflict, but not really escalating into genocide as we experienced in 1994, where 1 million of Tutsis actually lost their lives. What they did, they had what actually we heard in history of the Holocaust, where they were measuring noise and trying to describe each and every category in different way. And at the end, in 1959, where the Tutsis were on actually the ones actually they've been favorite before when the colonizers came, and this was they were favorized and the Hutus, they were taken as subordinate. And this was trying to create this difference, which in 1959, they decided to change actually their way of actually approaching this ethnicity and these categories of people. In 1959, 59, the king of Rwanda was killed, because the king was a uniting point for all Rwandans. They had one king, they respected the king, and they were saying that to destroy this society, the best way is to destroy the most important pillar of unity of Rwandans. And then the king was coming from the Tutsi category, and they raised up the Hutus to overthrow the Tutsis. Not only to overthrow them, not only to replace the leadership, but at the same time they decided to, if they don't leave the country, the Tutsis have to be killed. There have been a lot of killings, and that time the propaganda started against the Tutsis. The sense of deshumanization, they were called cockroaches, they were called snakes, they were blamed on every problem of the country, and the ideology was developed and also taught in different aspects of the life of the country, including into education system, and up to 1994, where they come to the final solution of in 1994 in April, more than 1 million of Tutsis were slaughtered in only 100 days. You can imagine, and this genocide left behind a lot of casualties, a lot of orphans. They destroyed the country, they destroyed the professionals of the country, the economy going beyond, below the normal line, become below zero, and also bring a lot of conflict and mistrust between societies. And this will, you can name, just to name few of the problems and challenges that left behind by genocide. And this actually was how we tried to deal with the aftermath of genocide, and try to use the memory of the persecution and the genocide and all challenges that are beyond. The Rwandans have to decide how to live again in the same country. This is very nice, small country, of course, beautiful country, and where the Hutu and never have a Hutu and Tutsi land. And what is very unique for Rwanda, the Tutsi and perpetrators and survivors, they find themselves actually living side by side again after genocide, and they were not choice that time instead of living together. And the government that is on the power today, that's really stopped the genocide, introduced the unity and reconciliation processes that really raised up again the country. So I've helped a lot, because that shows the ability of leadership in terms of raising up or preventing any escalation of violence, because it was possible that the revenge can be create kind of cycle of violence and cycle of hot hatred in the country, and the country keep the challenges that are there. So part of rebuilding our memory, we pass through different ways. One is building memorials, where we teach about the past and based on the memory of genocide, in order to build the past, the present, and the future. We had to deal with the justice, where we have to create our own community justice system that's based on our culture. And this actually will bring in more our memory into how the culture you were used to prevent and also to deal with the conflict. And then through the documentation of the past and also trying to learn from what we experienced to prevent actually the future violence. This is actually the narrative and memory of genocide are shared between survivors and through commemoration and also in the society. And we use documentation I just mentioned, and also we use also the education. So here I want to go and I will be very brief to try to bring in the very good ideas that showing how working together as a human being, as people of Africa. In 2017-18, we Tali and myself, and with using our both organizations, we decided to work together on a project called and a program called Change Maker Program. And this is a leadership program that uses the stories and a narrative of 3 case studies. This using the genocide and get the Tutsi in Rwanda, and also using a Holocaust and the story of apartheid. Yes, to learn about what can we learn from the past so that we can build a society with more resilience and resistance against the future violence. And this program, using the case studies from those countries, we managed to reach around 16 countries. And we know that each and every society have a story. And on what we've been encouraging the participant who have been learning about the how to prevent extremism, and how, so that even looking at how the extremism have destroyed our country, have destroyed our society, and also how to build up the values of empathy, critical thinking, preventing stereotype, and building the values of tolerance, and also preventing discrimination. So we encourage the people where we been actually interacting with to use their own stories, and use, for example, we've been in Nigeria with Nigerian society, where we ask them to use their own story, and use like one of the story, because we use 3 stories, and the Rwanda, apartheid, and the Holocaust. And for them, they use the story of the Biafra, which is their own tragedy that's actually the Nigerians experienced in the past years. So this is very important, because this program has been tested and evaluated and proven to be the best program that's really that's bring that inclusion also, but people using their own stories to prevent the future violence, and also to build a society that can resist to the manipulation. So I'm going to share and stop by here by sharing a short video of 2 or 3 minutes, and then I can be ready for questions. Thank you.
There's so many challenges. Some of them were related to the fact that the country had just lost more than 1 million lives. We had so many orphans, we had so many widows. The social fabric was destroyed. There was a need to reconstruct that social fabric, which is the foundation for every success of the country. So the country was in a very bad shape, but the country could see the light at the end of the tunnel.
After the establishment of Kigali Genocide Memorial, the question was what this memorial means for Rwandans, for survivors, for international people, in terms of looking back and learn from the past and understand the root cause of genocide so that we can be able to take measures to prevent it for the future. We had to find a methodology to get these people to learn from the past. The only way is through education. When we started it, we had so many challenges and the questions, and a lot of questions came into our mind. The first question was, how can we talk about genocide? What kind of methodology we should use? What kind of narrative we should introduce that brings peace? What kind of lessons that we should put together to make sure that we don't bring collective blames? Having in mind that survivors and perpetrators still living together. Having in mind that in the classrooms here in Rwanda, you find children of perpetrators, you find children of survivors, all learning together. So we adopted the storytelling methodology. Using stories that out from the communities, we realized that the community members are the right teachers to the communities.
With ESPR, we were working with the other boundary partners, as you call them, and specifically working with teachers to accompany the implementation of the new curriculum, which now had peace and values education as a cross-cutting issue.
I was very, very excited to see how the stories shared to the Ministry of Education through the Rwanda Education Board. That story had been used during the national examination in the senior 6 examination on the history. And that's exactly what we wanted, to make sure that we use our own stories, the stories of Rwanda. And we're going to continue with the National Examination Council, and at the same time with the Rwanda Education Board, to make sure that more and more stories contribute to different activities that education system is using in this country. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I'm ready for questions, but also handing over to my colleagues, Tali and George.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mutanguha, for that presentation. I would suggest that we allow the speakers to present all, and then at the end, we'll have a question and answer session. We already have received questions, so we will present those questions to all the speakers during the question and answer session. So at this point in time, it is my pleasure to ask Mr. Jorge Jairoce to please address us.
Ok. Boa noite. Muito obrigado pela oportunidade que me dão de poder falar aqui em direto para Moçambique, África do Sul e Ruanda. A minha fala de hoje vai debruçar-se sobre memória, narrativa e violência política, considerando o caso moçambicano. Eu vou partir da tese de que a violência política em Moçambique sempre foi algo presente na nossa memória histórica. Por via disso, a consideração das narrativas de outros em várias fases da história de Moçambique, que serviram para legitimar determinadas posições de subalternização política, o outro, diante desta narrativa, não teve outra escolha a não ser partir para a violência política. Então, eu vou partir dessa abordagem estrutural de que a violência política em Moçambique é algo já bastante antigo. Vamos considerar 2 momentos históricos, ou 3 momentos históricos. O primeiro momento é antes da chegada da colonização europeia, onde nós podemos denotar que havia Moçambique...
Can I intervene?
Sim.
Yeah. So, good night, everybody, and welcome. I'm Wilson Vung, I'll be the translator here. And my name is, I will translate now, my name is Jorge Jairoce, and I'm going to present about My talk will be about memory, narratives, and political violence in Mozambique. Yeah, and I want to stress that my argument is that the violence and political violence in Mozambique has always been present in our historical memory, and the way we have narrated the other in different phases of our history, has led to the legitimization of subalternization of the other. And the other finds itself in a situation where either it accepts a subaltern position and exclusion from power, or the need to take arms to defend its right to exist. Okay. Yes, Jairoce.
Ok. Então, eu vou considerar 3 momentos históricos. O primeiro momento, antes da presença da colonização europeia, onde nós encontramos uma violência envolvendo os vários reinos, as chefaturas locais em Moçambique. E depois, com a colonização europeia, vamos encontrar uma violência do colonizador contra o local, o nativo. Mas eu não quero, neste momento, discutir muito a questão da violência nesses 2 períodos. Eu quero me concentrar na questão da violência depois da independência.
Yes. Yeah. So I'll divide my speech in 3 moments. 3 historical moments: before, during, and after colonialism. And one kind of violence, the one before European colonization, was the violence that existed in Mozambique. Between the different proto-states and kingdoms in Mozambique. And then we have the colonial violence that had to do with both colonial penetration and colonial administration. But I would rather concentrate on the 3rd period of post-independence. That's the one I would like to dwell into now. Okay.
A razão principal que eu vou me concentrar na violência pós-independência é parte do princípio de que, se nós já sofremos violência em vários momentos históricos, então, uma vez independente, a ideia dos moçambicanos é que, uma vez independente, a violência iria cessar em Moçambique. Porém, não foi exatamente isso que aconteceu. Uma vez independente,
So the reason why I'm going to concentrate on this period, and post-independence period, is that we assume that after colonialism, after the liberation war, independence would bring peace to Mozambique. That once we're independent, we wouldn't have more violence in the country. And that's the puzzle that I'm interested in looking at.
É que quando nós chegamos à independência nacional, havia essa convicção de, estamos a sair da violência e vamos terminar a violência e vamos ficar totalmente em paz. Porém, essa independência, ela é dada num período, ou é alcançada num período em que há diferentes opiniões de como é que essa independência devia se alcançar. Ou seja, havia grupos que achavam que deveria haver eleições gerais em Moçambique para que os outros que não concordavam com aquele movimento libertador também pudessem participar e fossem incluídos no poder e tivessem ideias próprias de como é que Moçambique deveria seguir como uma nação independente.
So the problem is that after independence, there was a situation in Mozambique where there are different opinions on how the country should be politically governed, how this independence should be dealt with. So some groups thought that there should be elections in order to include in the discussion or in the future discussion different views about how to govern Mozambique, not only the views of those who had been involved in the armed struggle, but also the views of the others who had engaged in different ways with the colonial powers in the resistance and other forms of engagement.
O que acontece de seguida é que todos aqueles que não estivessem a favor do partido na altura do Frelimo e que tinha alcançado a independência foram perseguidos, foram assassinados, foram torturados e foram colocados fora do sistema. Então criou-se uma espécie de um descontentamento de um lado, que é aproveitado de certa forma pelas forças externas que não estavam felizes com a independência de Moçambique, como, por exemplo, o regime do apartheid na África do Sul, os próprios portugueses dissidentes em Moçambique não estavam felizes, não é? E com o regime de antissemita também, que não estava muito feliz com a independência de Moçambique. Então, essas forças externas vão buscar as forças internas que não concordavam, não é? Que não estavam muito a favor da forma como o governo estava a dirigir o destino do país na altura, vão se juntar e, como consequência disso, vamos ter uma guerra civil que vai começar em 1977, ou seja, 2 anos após a independência nacional.
So, what happens is that, as the elections were not considered to be an option, the party or the Frelimo party who the movement at that time who gained independence, refused to pursue this view of inclusion of other forces, and all those who were not in favor of the political project of Frelimo were either persecuted and killed. So this created a lot of dissidents that were then used by the regional powers in South Africa and Zimbabwe, or at that time Rhodesia, who were against Frelimo. And those governments in South Africa and then ex-Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, used those dissidents to create a force against Mozambique. And so 2 years after independence, in 1977, the civil war started in Mozambique.
Foi nesse contexto que surgiu a RENAM, que é a Resistência Nacional de Moçambique, que apoiou-se, em certa medida, nas decisões que a Frelimo tomou e que não foram muito positivas para o país, como, por exemplo, Operação Produção, que era levar as pessoas desempregadas para trabalhar no campo, levar todos aqueles que não concordavam com os ideais da Frelimo para os campos chama-se campos de concentração, campos de educação. Então, cria-se uma certa base de descontentamento a nível do país, há uma marginalização dos régulos locais que velavam pelo poder local, e isso tudo criou condições para que existisse uma base social ao nível da zona rural que foram apoiar, de facto, o movimento de resistência da RENAM. É sabido que a guerra civil aconteceu nas zonas rurais e foram exatamente nessas zonas rurais onde a RENAM teve a sua base social e que foi determinante para a longa luta de 16 anos que ocorreu em Moçambique.
So, and it is in this context, after 77, with the support of Rhodesia, of Jan Smith, Rhodesia and South Africa, that the RENAMO was created, the rebel movement, in Mozambique, now a political party. So, and it was both the use of dissidents and then out of other policies, internal policies implemented by Frelimo after 1977 or in the 80s, connected to things like Operação Produção. That was a program that created camps, different camps in the countryside, where people who were considered to be unemployed, idle, or generally undesirable in society were taken to. Those were camps in the far rural areas where people were taken to and had to stay there and be useful for society. And so this created a huge number of discontent. And then we had also the marginalization of local authority, like regulus, where mainly the rural base of power, in the colonial times, those were marginalized. So it's all these two processes created a social base for RENAMO in the rural areas. So RENAMO was able to use those bases to support and be able to wage a 17-year-long civil war.
Infelizmente, esses episódios não muito bons da nossa história de Moçambique, elas não são reportadas ou não são estudadas, não estão incluídas no nosso currículo do ensino primário e do secundário. Não é? Agora, por exemplo, disse que a guerra civil em Moçambique tem a ver com fatores externos, que a RENAM foi criada externamente para estabilizar o país. Mas como é que se explica essa guerra prolongada, não é, com a base social da população rural? Então, isso não se estuda. Significa que há um reconhecimento de que esta parte da memória não deve ser divulgada, não deve ser conhecida que é uma parte negra da nossa história. Infelizmente, isso está a acontecer nesse momento. Uma lição?
Yeah. So we have now a situation where, unfortunately, until now in Mozambique, yeah, the story of the war, yeah, the memories, you know, or what led to the war is not being taught in schools, and it's not in the academic curriculum and so on. So, like, yeah, the school books on history ignore this internal dimension of the conflict, no? Like the creation of dissidents by the politics or by policies implemented by the government. We concentrate on the external dimension of the conflict, on the interests of Rhodesia and South Africa. So, and it shows that, yeah, there is an understanding that this part of the history of Mozambique should not be thought of in schools, should not be discussed openly in the academia, or it shouldn't be passed to students and so on. Yeah.
O que eu quero tentar dizer é que a exclusão social desse grupo populacional a viver na zona rural, a exclusão social de um grupo que pensava diferente, a exclusão política desse grupo que pensava diferente, isso pode ter contribuído para uma prolongada guerra civil que nós vivemos em Moçambique, que é uma guerra, a chamada Guerra dos 16 anos. Porém, fomos até 1992, 16 anos de guerra, houve acordo de paz em 1992, em 1994 houve as primeiras eleições gerais, e a percepção de que havia que Moçambique, efetivamente, com as primeiras eleições gerais, tinha alcançado uma paz efetiva. Mas não foi isso que se viu mais tarde, como vou poder argumentar.
So, what I mean is that this social exclusion, no, of the people and leadership in the rural areas, the social exclusion of people who thought differently, has actually fueled a 17-year civil war that ended in 1992 with the General Peace Agreement of Rome, and led to the 1994 general elections that made many people believe that Mozambique would finally enter a new era of peace. And that's not what happened, and as I will show you now.
Acontece as eleições de 1992, a RENAM perdeu as eleições e houve todos aqueles problemas ligados, por exemplo, à questão de fraude eleitoral, perpetrada pelas autoridades, alegando que houve fraude por parte das entidades que faziam gestão eleitoral, a chamada roubo de votos, e não concordou com os resultados das eleições. Mas há uma coisa evidente que ficou, é que nessas eleições, a maior parte dos que votaram a RENAMO foram exatamente esses grupos rurais que apoiaram a RENAMO em tempos nesse processo da guerra civil. Então, ficou evidente essa parte.
Mm-hmm. So we had the elections in 1994, and the RENAMO, that the former guerrilla movement, lost the elections, but it didn't accept the electoral result because they claimed there was electoral fraud, committed by the organs of electoral administration. Yeah, but what was evident from the results of the election is that actually RENAMO had a huge rural base. It was a huge rural support. Yes.
E é verdade que a RENAMO acabou sendo o segundo partido mais votado e com assento no parlamento. Esperávamos que a RENAMO pudesse ajudar no processo da consolidação da democracia. Mas há um fenômeno que vamos encontrar aqui, é que o parlamento, para além de ser um lugar em que pudesse ser o centro da consolidação da democracia, passou a ser um campo de luta onde os insultos, a humilhação do outro passou a ser relevante. Por exemplo, era muito comum ouvir no parlamento acusações mútuas de que um foi assassino, o outro matou mais que o outro. Enfim, acusações que não ajudavam no processo da reconciliação do país. Isso foi recorrente em vários momentos da nossa história de Moçambique, ou em vários momentos dos nossos parlamentos em Moçambique.
Mm-hmm. So So what happened that we have this paradox in Mozambique that although Renamo lost, but they got, they were the second most voted. They got seats in parliament, but this parliament, became a place of continued struggle between the two former belligerents that used the parliament to exchange accusations of being the other being a murderer, and discussing who murdered the most citizens. So there was no, the parliament was not a place of reconciliation as such, and it is a feature that has continued for a long time.
Então, ficou evidente que os nossos parlamentos, né, os sucessivos parlamentos que foram ocorrendo, não serviram como espaço de consideração de democracia, mas, pelo contrário, como espaço de disputa política, de humilhação do outro, e vamos prosseguir de eleições para eleições. Houve sempre acusação de fraude, os parlamentos continuaram a fazer sempre o mesmo papel de disputa política, que é bom, mas no sentido negativo também ao mesmo tempo, porque havia sempre acusações. Significa que o país não conseguiu alcançar a verdadeira reconciliação da qual precisávamos. E, como resultado disso, em 2013, voltamos de novo à guerra.
So, and so what we can see is that in the 5 following parliaments resulting from different general elections, so that, the parliaments didn't become a space of consolidation of democracy in Mozambique. So they were rather a place of humiliation of the other, And we could observe that for each parliament, there was the sense that there was a total lack of true reconciliation through the political process in the country.
Mas também é preciso considerar que as nossas televisões, os nossos órgãos de comunicação público não ajudaram também nesse processo, porque os órgãos de comunicação público foram repetindo também essa forma de estar na política, não é? Traduzindo também a questão da humilhação ao outro, no nosso caso, os partidos da oposição, e isso não ajudou muito também a sociedade. Mas eu quero agora entrar na questão seguinte, é que tivemos essa guerra de 2013 até 2019, voltamos a ter outro acordo de paz. Em 2019 tivemos outro acordo de paz. Pensávamos que também poderíamos ter resolvido a questão da guerra. Não terminou mesmo aí, porque a Renamo dividiu-se, onde um grupo aceitou, de facto, o acordo de paz, o outro grupo continuou nas matas com a violência.
So, this situation led to in 2013 the eclosion of a new armed conflict between Renamo and against the government, and this was helped or not, was not much helped by the media, because the media was instrumental in repeating the kind of negative discourse that were being thrown at each party at the parliament. So, and it is, you can say that this form of humiliation that led to the 2003 conflict that ended in 2019, more or less, with another peace agreement. And it was believed that this peace agreement would finally lead again to peace, but rather it led to the split of Renamo into one group that accepted the agreement and another group who remained in its military base and continued to fight against the government. Yes.
Apesar de estar a existir a tal de desmobilização, não é, o DDR, desmobilização das forças, mas ainda com um grupo residual que ainda resistem nas matas, que não concordam com o posicionamento governamental. Onde eu quero chegar com isso é que nós temos uma longa história de violência em Moçambique. Então, é preciso, de facto, encontrar mecanismos para acabar com essa violência política. Então, eu trago aqui algumas sugestões que vou partilhar.
So, what we see is that, after this peace agreement, and despite the demobilization and the reintegration process that is in place now, we still have an armed group, that is in the bushes resisting, the efforts at integration in Mozambique. So my point is that we have a long story of violence in Mozambique, and I would like now to move into discussing some mechanisms that I think could be used to address this challenge that we are facing.
Bom, vejam só que eu aqui não referi a questão da guerra de Cabo Delgado, que é um outro assunto que merece outro debate. Mas também temos a violência em Cabo Delgado, neste momento, que é o grupo de terroristas, que vão usando, de certa forma, vão instrumentalizando alguns jovens locais para poderem participar. Mas eu não queria entrar muito nesse debate, porque eu estou ainda só a pegar na questão da Renamo e governo. Eles talvez traduzir essa parte.
Yeah. So I have to mention here that I have to alert here that I haven't mentioned Cabo Delgado because we have an ongoing conflict there. Yeah. And that has to do with the terrorist violence. Yeah. And it's not because it's not relevant, but I've just, because it is continuing, it is instrumentalizing young people, and it is an ongoing problem, but I'm just focusing now in the actual conflict between the government and Renamo. Yeah. Okay.
Então, eu acho que uma saída para essa questão, bom, tem, em primeiro lugar, o país precisa de repensar em políticas públicas de inclusão, tanto na área de educação, na área de saúde, na área de emprego, né, para que aquelas zonas do país com problemas de assimetria regionais gritantes possam também usufruir de alguma perspectiva de desenvolvimento. Primeiro, dar alguma perspectiva aos jovens, sobretudo nas zonas rurais, também nas zonas urbanas temos problema, mas vamos começar a apostar naqueles grupos mais vulneráveis para que eles possam, de facto, estar incluídos socialmente. Primeiro ponto. Segundo ponto, o país precisa de refletir seriamente na questão da educação patrimonial. Como é que se alcança? Incluindo nos currículos escolares alguns conteúdos específicos ligados, por exemplo, à paz, ligados à questão da tolerância, à questão de não preconceitos, direitos humanos, mas também precisamos de criar lugares de memória para que possamos implementar uma educação patrimonial onde assuntos de violência política são discutidos de forma aberta e sem tabu.
Okay. So, I have here some points, and the first one is connected to the need of adopting public policies of inclusion in education, health, labor, to combat the glaring regional asymmetries in the country. We need to have those policies because to target like young people, vulnerable groups in those regions to have more opportunities. Yeah, that would be my first suggestion of a mechanism. The second one would be patrimonial education or education in terms of patrimony, cultural patrimony, including specific content linked to peace, tolerance, the fight against prejudice, fight for human rights, and also sites of memory, like developing a site of memory or positive discourse where people could interact.
Falando de lugares de memória, nós efetivamente temos em Moçambique alguns lugares de memória. Temos alguns museus, temos alguns monumentos, mas que esses monumentos, esses museus, continuam sendo ainda espaços de disputa de memória. Por quê? Porque sempre baseiam-se numa questão de memória seletiva. Por exemplo, nós não temos, ao nível do país, algum museu ou algum espaço de memória onde se discute a questão da guerra civil de forma aberta. Então, nós temos aí um espaço de memória onde o detentor de poder decide que conteúdos deve colocar lá. Então, acaba, de certa forma, não alcançando aquilo que é educação patrimonial inclusiva. Isso é um problema. E nós temos que aprender com países como a África do Sul, com esse centro de memória do Holocausto, temos que aprender com Ruanda e os outros países não é? Nesse modelo que estão a fazer agora do espaço de memória.
Yeah. So if you think about places of preservation of memories, yeah, it is true that we have in Mozambique museums and monuments, but those museums and monuments in Mozambique, they are still space of disputes. No? Yeah. So because the memories that are there, they are selective memories. We don't have, for instance, discussions, yeah, on the Civil War. Yeah. The power holders, no, they are the ones who decide what to put on those sites. So the museums are not inclusive. Yeah, we are still not open like the way you have in South Africa with for instance, with the Holocaust and Genocide Museum, or the way you have in Rwanda with all the memorials for the victims of the 1994 genocide, where the discussion is more open, yeah, between victims and perpetrators and so on.
Então, para finalizar, eu considero que se não apostarmos em políticas de inclusão social e política concretas, porque o país faz, mas precisamos de fazer muito mais do que estamos a fazer. Se não apostarmos nessas políticas de inclusão social e política e numa educação patrimonial, estarão sempre lá as bases para para a violência política futura, não é? E o país está já cansado cansado disso e acaba minando de certa forma o desenvolvimento do país. Então precisamos de apostar seriamente nesses aspectos que eu acabei de referir. E queria mais uma vez agradecer pela oportunidade que me dão de poder falar um pouco da questão da violência e memória política e memória em Moçambique. Obrigado.
Yes. So I would say that lastly, I would say that it's really important that we in Mozambique invest in the politics of inclusion, and that would be social and political and also patrimonial education, because yeah, if we don't do this, there will always be basis, no, for more conflicts, and in the end it is affecting the country's development. Yeah, it's affecting the country's development. And with this, I would like to end my presentation and thank you for this opportunity of presenting this topic to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jairoce. Thank you. And also thank you, Mr. Nuvunga, for your translation, and for that. It was wonderful. We're all able to follow the conversation and the important things that Mr. Jairoce was saying. So thank you very much for that. It is now my pleasure to invite Tali Nates, Director of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre, to address us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for such interesting and rich conversation, both from my colleagues in Rwanda and in Mozambique. And I want to also thank Rosa Luxemburg Foundation for the wonderful partnership on this webinar. What I will try to do is to bring some of your points, both your points about genocide, about civil war, about remembering the past, and look at us in South Africa and look at our Holocaust and Genocide Centre as a place that tries to look at memories and narratives and storytelling to unpack some of those issues of othering, and then look at some mechanisms of how to strengthen our reaction to those types of hatred, identity-based hatred. I thought I will share with you some photographs and some places in our center that maybe will make those connections. So allow me to share my screen and start actually with a saying by Primo Levi that appears, of course, in our lobby. This is 80 years after the events of the Holocaust. We said the words never again, again and again after the Holocaust. It doesn't matter that genocides happened before the Holocaust, like in Namibia or Armenia, or after the Holocaust, like in Cambodia or Rwanda or Srebrenica or Myanmar just a few years ago. But those words basically are words of warning by Auschwitz survivor and writer Primo Levi that says it happened, therefore it can happen again. This is the core of what we have to say. It can happen, and it can happen everywhere. Now, these words are very important in South Africa. South Africa, of course, suffered from colonialism, from apartheid, from crimes against humanity, but is still 27 years after our democracy, is certainly not a perfect place. It is still a place of racism. It is a place of othering. And it is a place where xenophobia and Afrophobia is frighteningly on the rise. We can just think about Operation Dudula, which targets foreigners that are refugees, asylum seekers, or migrants, and at the ideas that developed in the last years of put South Africans first, that is very scary, and copy words that are uttered elsewhere from the United States or other places. And in a way, what I want to maybe speak about when we look at those words side by side next to our exhibition around issues of xenophobia and Afrophobia is to say the cycle continues and we always need to be vigilant, because maybe the targeted group is different. Every time it is different, but the targeting is still there and we cannot fall asleep. We need to be awake, and we need to act very, very quickly. One more thing that I want to speak about in connection to the presentation that we heard about Mozambique. Colonial powers are different. In Rwanda, Freddy spoke about Germany and Belgium as the colonial powers. In Mozambique, in Angola, in other places, it was Portugal. In other places, it was maybe Great Britain or France. But what is quite interesting is that we speak about the colonial powers, but we do not speak, for example, in South Africa, about our own difficult histories that hurt those places, like Angola, like Mozambique, like Namibia. And I'll give you a very, very small example. Germany is coming to terms with its very difficult colonial past in Namibia, where the German colonial powers in 1904 until 1908 targeted the Herero and Nama over Herero, Nama, San, and other populations, and committed genocide against those people. Last year in 2021, there was recognition of that genocide. South Africa controlled Namibia, or Southwest Africa, from 1916 until 1990. Okay, Germany controlled it from 1885 to 1916. South Africa, 1916 to 1990. The crimes that were committed by South Africa in my name, in South Africans' name, doesn't matter that it was an apartheid regime or other regimes, it was in the name of South Africa. Those crimes we just don't talk about. We do not talk about. And we are struggling to speak about our crimes in Angola, our crimes in Mozambique, and so on. So I'm just putting the picture there because I think that these words of Primo Levi about it's happening again and again, and those words of never again are really important. So what are our roles as museums? Because I'm speaking from a museum, we spoke about memorials and the need for memorials. What is our role? Now, it's interesting that in 2020 and also in 2021 survey, museums were voted as highly trusted sources of information. History museums were voted at 78% trust around the world. Just to explain to you, and you can go to the website, you can read more about it, but just to tell you that, for example, news or TV news or media is probably 20 to 30% less trusted than museums. Now, why am I saying that? Because as the world that we live in, and as we know with the wars, Ukraine and Russia, the coup in Myanmar, the wars in Yemen and in Syria, in Africa, in places all around the continent, there is an assault on truth. And nationalism, populism, illiberal democracies, all that is growing. So this is an important role for museums to actually work against othering. So I'm generalizing that the othering can be on race, it can be on ethnicity, it can be on religion, it can be on other things. The role of memorials and museums is really, really important. Now, I'm coming from one museum, the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre, and of course, you know from our name that the histories that we talk about are the histories of genocide in the 20th century, starting in Namibia, through Armenia, but then going to the Holocaust, to Rwanda, and then making connections to South Africa. What we try to do throughout the exhibition, throughout the work that we do, is to make connections to South Africa in the past. So colonialism, apartheid, crimes against humanity, but also to South Africa at the present day. And if we think that 27 years after democracy we arrived, what I'm trying to say is, sadly, we did not. We are replacing the targeting many times between one group with another group. So what we are trying to do is look at where othering is taking place. And we do it in different ways. We look at it through exhibitions, through the arts, through music, through testimonies. We look at different voices of bystanders and resistors and upstanders and victims and perpetrators and so on. And we try to open the discussion to look at narratives, at storytelling, to understand the othering. So let me give you an example. In our exhibition, we have stories of refugees, and we talk a lot about refugees because sadly refugees today are, we have more refugees today than we had after the Second World War, not only in Africa, from different African. In what we do, we tell the story of this man. This man is Herbert Lichtenstein. His son was our accountant, Selwyn Lichtenstein. Hopefully you can hear me. I see my internet is not stable, but hopefully you can hear me. This exhibition shows these artifacts and photographs of the family of this young man, Herbert Lichtenstein, and it was hidden in the house for 80 years. When we started to collect testimonies and artifacts and photographs and stories and narration of people that were othered, people that were targeted. In the case of the Holocaust, there were targeted groups, amongst them Jewish victims, of course. 6 million of them were murdered in the Holocaust. And Herbert Lichtenstein, that came from Berlin, his family was targeted. Now, in this cabinet and in this story, we tell the story of him as a 16-year-old or 17 years old young man in Germany that manages to run or to escape to South Africa. He gets a visa to escape to South Africa. His mother, Marguerite, also gets the visa, but his sister does not get the visa. So his mother, Marguerite, decides to stay with the sister, Erna, in Germany, in Berlin. He immigrates, he moves to South Africa, he tries to get them out, he fails, and both Erna and Marguerite are murdered in the Holocaust. He volunteers to the army, he fights the Nazis, but he loses his family. So the use of artifacts is really, really important. When you try to tell a story of othering, a story of genocide, a story of civil war, like in the case of Mozambique, individual stories are critical. Don't stay with the numbers. You need to tell the individual stories, and using artifacts, like in this case of Veronica Phillips, a Holocaust survivor from Hungary that settled in South Africa and sadly passed away last year. She donated to our center her childhood doll, and that doll that survived the Holocaust in the ghetto of Budapest, while Veronica went between 3 different concentration camps and then immigrated to South Africa, told his story, donated the doll. That was very important. The same with stories of genocide survivors from Rwanda, like Sylvester, that speaks about artifacts such as his childhood shoes or other items of his childhood. So survivors and testimonies are key, and I wanted to emphasize that. We are collecting South African stories as well, not only of xenophobia and of refugees, but also those that suffered during apartheid and are sharing their stories of suffering with us. And we are recording those stories too. Stories of the genocide of Rwanda are also gathered through people that study here, or maybe worked here for a while, or settled for medical treatment or other ways. Many of the survivors did not speak for 20 years. And when we started to collect the stories, there was the time that many of them started to talk. Now, to explain the importance of that, when you look at memories, at narratives of othering, I want to draw your attention to this saying that I'm going to share with you. This is Antoinette, a survivor of the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, that was interviewed, and she said, I need to find the strength to tell my story. If I don't, it is like denying the genocide. If I, the only survivor of my family, die without telling my history, it will die with me. The name of our family will disappear forever. I want my child to learn about our history. I don't want it to be hidden. And I think this is the key. The key is collect the artifacts, collect the photographs, collect the testimonies, because those, if not, and collect the names, because those will disappear forever if we just stay on the numbers and the big narrative story. We do need to go to the individual stories. What we did as well, and this is very important, and we are continuing to do so, is to collect those stories and teach them as lessons for schools, for universities, for teachers, through 2 volumes. They are available free of charge on our website, and those are portraits of survival of Holocaust survivors that came to settle in South Africa. And the second volume of this book is survivors of the genocide against the Tutsi that settled in South Africa. We are working now on a project to tell the story of refugees from different countries in Africa that settled in South Africa. And this is extremely important as xenophobia is all the time on the rise. My friend Freddy spoke about the Change Makers program, and that is, just to say, really important to translate the painful histories that we spoke about, that Freddy already mentioned, to also painful histories in Nigeria, in Kenya, in Sudan, in Zambia. We were just in Zambia, or in Mozambique. And we are very, very happy to work with a group from Mozambique this week. Xenophobia, just to end on two examples of where memories and narratives are so important. The story of xenophobia and Afrophobia is in our permanent exhibition. And this is through photographs of two photojournalists, Alon Skye and James Otway, that photographs xenophobic violence against refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants in South Africa from 2008 to today. These are some of those photographs that you can see here. For example, this very, very powerful photograph where you see the names of all the countries in Africa on the right, in the middle of the city of Johannesburg. But on the other hand, you see, of course, the rioters and the xenophobic violence perpetrators, as well as the police and some bystanders in the same photograph. Or this very powerful photograph that we use a lot of an attack in 2018 of someone that is suspected to be a migrant, but he is showing his South African ID card. And he's saying, I'm South African, what do you want from me? But that attack through this photograph is used for education intervention by our fantastic facilitators on a daily basis. The book Brother, of course, the play between brother and other, is now in its second edition. And this book, based on those photographs that you saw, as well as many essays by prominent thinkers and writers like Justice Malala, like Justice Edwin Cameron, Koketso Moeti, a civil activist, and others, is really an important resource to talk about those issues of othering and what can we do about it. Just finally, to say that exhibitions are also really important. So how do you portray, for example, the persecution of people with disabilities? This is really important. You connect to painful history, for example, during the Holocaust or during colonialism in South Africa, as you can see in this picture, or during apartheid. But then you connect to current issues that we are dealing now with. And for example, the issue of the Life as Sidimeni tragedy, the death by torture, starvation of 144 mentally and physically disabled patients in NGOs in our province in Johannesburg. So I think it's really important to use exhibitions, narrations, testimonies, and books and more to talk about these stories. And finally, just to say that there are new methodologies that you can use. For example, digital storytelling, so films, little video clips, and sound, podcast, SoundCloud that can be used. And this was an exhibition that we did about refugees called My Congo, My Story. And all that is really to put together some of the ways that we deal with othering in the past, but also othering currently, if it is about abilities, refugees, or any other issue that we are dealing with. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm handing over to Mdu.
Thank you. Thank you, Tali Nates. for that fascinating and very revealing presentation and making those connections and mentioning the importance of taking responsibility. I think that you've made this point before in other conversations that as South Africans, we should actually look at our role in the atrocities committed in the name of South Africa. Doesn't matter the regime that was in power at the time, but it was done in the name of South Africa. I think that's a very important point. So it is now time for our question and answer session. And to moderate this part of the program, I'm going to invite Mr. Milisau Nuvunga. And of course, Mr. Milisau Nuvunga is the Executive Director of the Center for the Studies of Peace, Conflict, and Well-Being, and has also been kindly been our translator when Mr. Jairoce was addressing us. So at this moment in time, Mr. Nuvunga, I will hand over to you.
Thank you, Mdu, and good night, everyone. And I will start by thanking our three presentations for their very exciting and really touching presentations. Yeah. And I would also take the opportunity to thank the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation for making this possible. This interaction possible between different organizations like the Aegis Trust, the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Foundation, and the Center, and the Center for the Studies of Peace, Conflict, and Well-Being. It is really a pleasure to be here with you. I would say that, and Tali, to you also personally for your energy in bringing us all together. Yeah, I have to say thank you since the onset, some 4 years back or 5 when we first met. You have, really been very helpful and in helping us in discussing this issue in Mozambique. So I think I will speak on my behalf and on behalf of Jairoce when I say thank you to you and the Center for your support and friendship throughout these years. I will start by saying that from your presentations, before I go to my questions, I would say that it is fascinating, like for me, the case of Freddy. Yeah, and that's one point that you raised about Rwanda, that you have differences without places. Huh? And I think it is a challenge for us. Like in Mozambique, we are used to ask, where do you come from? Where your mother is from? Where does your father come from? Where were you born? And then we play with that, But it is difficult for me to imagine, being different and being like, let's say, of the same race, same color, almost same language, and still consider, imagine that someone is not like me, And that is for me, it is still a challenge, And it was nice to hear you talking about it and explaining it. It was, nice. It is a very nice point for us that shows the importance and the depth of what Rwanda has done. So it is, it's really good. And I think for us, I would say in terms of Jairoce's presentation, I think Mozambique is a paradox where peace processes and democratization processes actually seem to be leading to more conflict, more othering, more violence, more extremism between actors. And this is counterfactual, actually. It is very strange. We are having continuing elections, as Jairoce pointed out, but they are not leading to more positive outcomes. So this is an interesting fact that, as he pointed out, there needs a reflection about the need to deepen democracy with memories and with politics of inclusion. And I think from Tali's presentation, I really liked, I liked the presentation, but I was really touched by the use of history, individual stories, because and this is one point that in Mozambique, we use it, but not also very well. It is very partial. We have lots of individual stories, but they are not broad enough to bring about an open debate about memories and narratives. So while you have like survivors and testimonies, we have victors and testimonies, in Mozambique. So it is another approach to it. And I still remember when some years back, we brought to Mozambique a famous historian, Professor Marlin Newitt, yeah, who has written about Mozambique like 30, 40 years back. Yeah, so he has been following the story. So about Mozambique from before colonialism to the present, and it's written, it's a huge authority on the field. And he said that the problem with Mozambique and many other countries is that they don't write local stories, local histories. They don't go to people, to places, small places, and write about it. And that is what creates diversity. Yeah. So I will just go to some of my points. I just wanted to raise some of the issues that I thought were really compelling in your presentations. But I would say I have like three points that, I think the first point you have pointed out already in your presentations and that I had, but I will just mention here, like how different societies have constructed discourses and processes of belonging and bridging. Yeah, belonging in the sense of creating a sense of community, of what people have in common, and the bridging in the sense of recognizing that there are differences, that the groups are different, but they can find what kind of mechanisms are found to create common ground between groups, like making difference not a problem, but a way of, a way of living without, necessarily leading to violence. And the second question, I think I would say that putting aside, the issues of violence and marginalization, what do you think about this othering in memories? Is it only a mechanism of power in the institution building in a given direction? Or can we see othering, even when it is negative, as a very important process of group or societal cohesion? How can we build a society? And this is a provocation. How can we build a society without othering? I think that is a challenge that we face in many groups. Many people who are well-meaning, who mean well, they still don't know how to build a society without making us and them. Yeah. So the third question, is actually more methodological. Do you think that, narratives, othering, and memories can be used differently depending on the targets? Let's say sometimes othering is used in terms of race, trying to other the other in terms of race, as in Germany, or can be in terms of ethnicity, like othering the other in terms of ethnicity, like in Rwanda. Nationality, like in Mozambique, you have a discourse of nationality or national unity that makes some, more Mozambicans than the others, but it is a process, But does it change? Does othering and memories and narratives change methodologically if we change the target? If we have race, ethnicity, nationality, or language, for instance. So that would be like, kind of the issues I would raise from now, and maybe, see what you have to say, and then pass the word to the other participants to have their opinion also, on the subject. Thank you. I don't know who will start. Who wants to start?
Milição, eu não percebi bem as questões. Estou a pedir mandar para mim.
Okay, I'll send the questions in I'll try to send some points to Jairoce, and then so you, Tali and Fred, you have to begin.
Okay. Freddy.
Yes, yes, thank you very much, and Lily. It's very, very important when we talk about how the different society actually try to rebuild again and build a society that in places where we want to live. I think I have to come back on the case study I brought in, actually my country, Rwanda, and probably I can even talk about other countries, but let me talk in where I feel much more comfortable to give example. So I was thinking that right after genocide in 1994, our society as Rwandans, we find ourselves in really, really a huge challenge, and where we we find ourselves, we have survivors crying for justice. We had wounded survivors with physically wounded and traumatized. We had a number of perpetrators because the genocide in Rwanda was committed by normal people in the society. Not just, of course, was committed and incited by government that was really giving all the means to make this atrocity to happen. But the genocide was perpetrated in the street with neighbors standing against neighbors. And after genocide, you can imagine the level of trust was really very low. And we find us in a society where there's no trust, there's no willing even to come together. There's survivors having that feeling of anger and many of them thinking that we should revenge as well. So, and then when you go to the country itself and on economy part of it, you find the economy had been destroyed completely, with all infrastructure been also destroyed, and then structure related to health, to education, to any life of the country was really on the ground. So how do you, where do you start to with this country? It's really was really a puzzle, and really salute the current administration, the current government, that really the priority was actually how to, they took time to sit down. I remember that there is a very famous conference or discussions that took around 2 years, people thinking what to do, how to, and each and every issue of the country, because genocide have affected all life of the country. Children, young people, adults, gender, culture, education, health, everything have been really affected. And then the discussion have been looking at all aspects of the country's life. And from that, people came up with very much energized, and they had a priority to say the priority one, security, because if we have people who are traumatized, who have anger, we need to make sure that the physical security for everyone is secured. I have to say that also the army and police that have been asked to ensure the security of everyone, they were part of this story, because among them there are survivors, among them there are people who came and they lost their families, but they are through the leadership, they have to go beyond their feelings. They have to go beyond what they think is actually what the feelings telling them, but also thinking about how to raise up the country again. So security was the priority, and then we had to think about, yes, of course, we need to look back and try to raise and work hard to bring back the economy of the country. And then they started actually this unity and reconciliation processes. But all those was to value each and everyone's story. That was very important. The survivors, they were listened, they were heard, and then the government to take time to go through the process of mourning and a process of commemoration, listening to survivors. And a lot of trauma have been healed. Actually, many people have been healed in the way of being heard and being listened to. the country had to address also, because you can do all those things, but you have to think that impunity brings back violence. So, and I'll give you one of the experience of Rwanda, where we had millions of perpetrators in the country. And when you estimate using the classic justice, it will take more than 200 years to try everyone with lawyers and, have a defense and everything. So we have to look at, in our system, in our culture, and we had a system that called gachacha. Gachacha is where people gather under a tree in the grass and try to ask the wise people to help and resolve the conflict. That was applied again, was mixed up with the modern justice, but also the traditional justice, and where perpetrators come back to the village, even if they're in prison, they bring back to the village. They are encouraged to ask for forgiveness. Survivors also encouraged to provide forgiveness, but also telling the truth. And then the backbone of this traditional justice was the main, and the backbone of it was truth. So where perpetrators tell exactly what they did, how they get inside, how they get what the motivation was that time, and then the end as forgiveness. That was more not punitive, but also was more restorative justice, which is very, very important, where people are committed to tell the truth, and then at the end of the day, the survivors provide for forgiveness. That process have taken like 10 years, where each and every week, taking 2 days per week, and you can see how heavy it was. People gathering in the villages, talking about it, and you can actually realize how the Rwandan people were very much committed to talk about and bring debate and discussions around their own issues. So that at the end of the day, almost 2 million cases have been handled, completely different from the international courts for Rwanda, which handled less than 100 cases and badly handled. So, but when you see the budget that used to handle those 100 cases, it's counted into billions, where in Rwanda actually was a very cheap way of, you cannot even compare how much we spend to handle 2 million cases to international courts, which handled less than 100 cases. So that's how we find out. That's very important. You have to highlight on this, that the solution is within the community. The homegrown solution is the best solution that people can have. The solution of the past, how to address the past of Mozambican people, it's in Mozambique. It's not in Rwanda. It's not in South Africa. It's not in Europe and France or everywhere, but it's within the community in Mozambique. Our solution in Rwanda is in Rwanda, where people have to sit down, look into their own history and own culture and their own language and own beliefs, and find solutions of their own problems. So that's how I have to say that by bringing back our own solutions, not important solutions, the country is how it is now, with the journey still long. The reconciliation is a process. There is a lot of work need to be done. We still have deniers. We still have people who feel that they didn't finish their job, but at the same time, those are few, which is very, very important. That's how we need there's no stop. We've been talking about the change maker program, learning from the past and build tomorrow's leaders. And those leaders who will be able to take decisions and take the right decision how to build the society with the peace, without prejudice, without division, with the stereotype, and a society that's much more reconciled, which is very, very important. So that the learning we had, and of course, probably I may come back to any other question, but let me stop by first question and leave my colleagues to answer the other questions you asked.
Okay, thank you, Freddy. So I will quickly pass the word to Tali, so you can move on. Tali, you're welcome.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you, Freddy, because it was very rich, you know, it was very layered, your answer. And I want to maybe highlight very shortly few things. Maybe let's start with what you ended with, that it's a process. It's not a magic wand. It's not a one time, you know, I put a magic wand on your head and voila, we are all, you know, we are all living in harmony and peace and hugging each other. If we look at the case of the Holocaust, ended in 1945, the land of the perpetrators, if it's Germany or Austria, it took, just to take Germany for an example, the memorial, we're speaking about the memorial, the main museum built in Berlin, the capital of Germany, the land of the perpetrators, was only open in 2005. It took 60 years to get there. So that is something that we need to remember. That's the one point. The other point I think that is important to remember is that the victims, may it be in Mozambique, the victims of the civil war, or in South Africa, or anywhere, are living with trauma. And that trauma is individual trauma, but there is also a communal trauma. The people are traumatized, and there is a narration and narrative of trauma. And I'll give you again a Holocaust-related example, which is very, very clear. Early on in this story of the Holocaust, in November of 1938, the Nazis burned the synagogues and arrested 30,000 men and killed many and looted and raped and so on in what we know today as Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, or the November pogroms. That was in November 1938. Now, the trauma was of the men that were sent to concentration camps, of the families, of people, you know. But if you think about 2 years ago, an attack on a synagogue in Germany. So in 2020 or 2019, there was an attack on a synagogue in Germany, in Halle. And what is happening to the Jewish people, may it be in America or in South Africa or in England, there's trauma. Why is the trauma 80, 90 years later? Because it's deep inside that fear that there is an attack on a synagogue. And here again, we are not safe. Here again, there is an attack on a synagogue. So I'm just simplifying it, but the trauma is very, very important. And we do need to remember the trauma. Finally, just to speak about the issue of identities and issue of hearing all the voices. Freddy spoke about listen to all the voices. And that is not easy. We tend to marginalize certain voices. We tend to not include all voices. Even the perpetrators, do we try to understand what brought them to that hatred? What is bringing to those issues? So I think We need to hear all voices, and we need to allow for wider identities. Melissa, you spoke about identity according, you were born there, you speak this language, and your parents were there. Do we open spaces for multiple identities? You are this and this and this and this. And this is through education, this is through listening, this is through capturing full voices and full stories. And this is, allowing space for those stories. And I think I'll stop there, but I'm thinking these are important in all case studies in South Africa, definitely in the Holocaust, definitely in Rwanda, but these are maybe the mechanisms that will allow us to look beyond race, ethnicity, gender, religion, and so on, because it's mechanisms to open the discussion and the conversation.
Okay, thank you, Tali. And I will now pass the word to Jairoce just for some comments. I would really ask to be a bit brief so that we can pass the word to the presentations. I've heard from Du that we have less than 20 minutes. We have 20 minutes maybe now, so that we can pass the word to the participants also. So Jairoce, you have 5 minutes. Max, okay. I hope.
Okay, no, okay. It's good. Muito obrigado, mais uma vez. Eu só quero fazer algum comentário relacionado a algumas questões que o nosso moderador, o Melissão, colocou. Bom, é preciso reconhecer que Moçambique está no processo de construção do Estado-nação. Um processo de construção do Estado que ainda não está consolidado. E nesse processo de construção do Estado-nação, temos que ter em conta que é o mesmo partido que está a governar desde a independência nacional. E como tal, haverá sempre a necessidade deste partido legitimar a sua memória histórica como um partido libertador do país, do colonialismo português, e como o melhor partido para promover o destino da nação. Mili?
You're muted.
Sorry. Good. Here I am. So just start by raising some issues connected to what the moderator said. I have to point out that Mozambique is in a process of state building, and we have had the same political party in power since independence. So of course there is a tendency for this party to legitimize its history, to legitimate its history, both as the party who has liberated the country and also as the best party to ever build the nation or to construct the future of the country. Thank you.
O que temos percebido é que esse discurso de memória para legitimar a ideologia política está sempre presente, por exemplo, em discursos eleitorais. Quando há campanha eleitoral, os discursos eleitorais estão sempre presentes no discurso de memória, para legitimar, cada um quer legitimar a sua posição política. De um lado, temos os partidos da oposição a querer legitimar a sua posição política, acusando o partido no poder de não estar a fazer devidamente o seu papel. Do outro lado, temos o partido no poder que quer legitimar as suas posições políticas, que está a fazer o melhor que os outros. Então, aqui o recurso à memória histórica estará sempre presente. E não só no âmbito da campanha, como também no âmbito de discursos parlamentares que nós temos visto ao nível dos debates. Recorre sempre constantemente a memória para legitimar as posições. Sim.
So what we have seen is that the use of memory is something that is very active in Mozambique. It's always present, for instance, in elections, where even oppositional parties use memory to point out the failures of the governing party, and the governing party also use this memory to show its background or its right to govern, taking into account its past achievements. So the use of memory in the case of Mozambique is always present in every electoral cycle, and it then passes on onto the different parliaments, as it was mentioned before.
O que eu quero dizer com isso é que nós estamos ainda longe de discurso reconciliatório. Nós precisamos de construir discurso reconciliatório em todo momento. A tal reconciliação de que falamos, que não depende só de lado, depende de todos. Precisamos, de facto, que haja tais políticas de inclusão social e política para que todos sintam que estão no mesmo barco e que o país é o mesmo, a nação é a mesma e que todos temos papel para a construção desse processo de nação. Mas também, do outro lado, temos que, de facto, ver que os lugares de memória devem ser inclusivos. O meu grande receio é criar-se lugares de memória para legitimar determinado tipo de memória, excluindo outro tipo de memória. Então, nós precisamos, de facto, de pensar em lugares de memória que ajudem nesse processo de reconciliação nacional e que ajude até a criar uma estabilidade para a paz. Em poucas palavras, é isso que eu queria dizer.
Okay. So what can I say is that we are, in this scenario, we are far from a reconciliatory discourse in Mozambique. Yeah, and we need to engage in a process, no? Yeah, and this process of reconciliation and this, yeah, it has to be one that involves everyone. As I said before, has to be based in a process of inclusion, political and social inclusion. Yeah, and that allows people to discuss and have an idea of one country where everybody has a role. Yeah, and a critical point in that would be to have inclusive places of memory, because those would help in reconciliation, yeah? And help also in, yeah, I think I will stop there. Yeah, they help in reconciliation. That's, yeah, what I think is most important. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So for the presentators, I would like to open the floor for, yeah, for people who want to speak and to contribute to the debate. Is not answering and question kind of thing. It's just that we are free to come with our ideas and suggestions on what we feel about the issue and what we think should be done about it. So it's not question and ask, yeah, question and answer kind of moment. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So,
well, Melissa, I have yes, I have a question. Well, it is a question, but also it's an observation maybe from Jill. So Jill is saying all the presentations have been very good, but she would like a comment on what lessons Rwanda has for the current existential crisis in the Ukraine. And I think she was specifically directing this to Freddy, but I think all of us can answer. But maybe Freddy can begin.
Well, thank you very much for the question. What I have to say is very, very simple, that it's unfortunate that the world is not learning from the past. So people and political, actually people in the political area, do they really think about the people's lives? Do they even think about their actions before they act? Do they think about what they do will cost lives of people before they do it, before they put the political interest on actually in front of them? How do they think about the impact it will have to people? We have seen the Ukraine invading Russia invading Ukraine. You can see people really suffering and was in the cold. They were bombing the cities, and the civilians actually lost their lives, a lot of refugees without support. And that's really something probably, it puzzles me, and how the politicians and people that's really bring the world to the people, what they think and how they, what they think about the consequence of what to do. I still have a question, and it's still a question, but what this situation, how Rwanda can be a lesson, up to now, I don't know. So I don't know, because because I think what the Rwanda should be an example where the politics of division, of thinking being against others, have costed 1 million of people in Rwanda. People should learn about it. If you don't learn about it, actually we're losing really opportunity to do it. So that's what I can say.
Maybe if I can just add, because I think it's important, the issue of the misuse of the term genocide that is misused by President Putin, and also the misuse of history and the distortion of history. And if I think that is very much connected to our topic today. Learning from history, not distorting or shaping the history to suit you and suit your political narration or narrative. And also genocide is an international term. It is the intent to destroy a whole nation. That was the case against the Tutsi in Rwanda. That was the case against the Khmer in Cambodia. That was the case against the Herero in Namibia, the Jews during the Holocaust, and so on and so forth. And you cannot misuse it to start a war of conquest and against an independent country. And I think that is a terrible warning for all of us, what is happening in the last month since the 24th of February. This misuse of history and distortion of history. I just had to say it because that is really key. We need to look at all of history. We need to listen to all voices, and we cannot, shape the history as we wish the history to be shaped and misuse it.
I think we still have two questions on the chat, no?
Yes. So there's one from Carolyn who says, can you talk more about collective trauma? And I think she's just throwing this out there to everyone. So I don't know who would like to start. Maybe we can start with Freddy again.
Yes, and I will respond to that question as not the expert in trauma, as really someone who's been living into the experience of where I have seen the collective trauma cases in my country, where I think and in my country, survivors thinking about the genocide, their own experience, what they experienced in the past, have been a nightmare for them, and what you see, this actually brings the story itself bring collective trauma to all survivors, but through collective trauma, of course, and there's specific individuals' trauma, and that need to be dealt in specifically. But in general, we have observed that when you bring, for example, the question of talking and listening to stories of survivors, you can see how people feel individually, flashback coming up, but at the same time, it's become a collective story to everyone. So it's, I'm not expert on these things, but at the same time, I have to speak through the experience that we have.
I don't know if Tali or Mr. Jairoce would like to maybe comment on this observation about collective trauma.
I spoke a little bit about it before, and because we're running out of time, I'll just say that collective trauma is not just linked to genocide. Trauma can be related to climate, and Mozambique certainly has that trauma from terrible natural disasters that are leaving whole communities in trauma, and also trauma can be related to war and to other types of violence. So of course, we always think about Holocaust or genocide for collective trauma, but I do want to highlight the fact that sadly, communal trauma can be related also to climate, environment, and also to other things like war.
And I think with that, Mr. Nuvunga, I think we will close the question and answer session. Thank you very much. So thank you very much to all of tonight's speakers, Tali Nates, Jorge, Jairoce, Freddy Mutanguha, as well as Mr. Milisao Nuvunga. Thank you very much. And for those of you who were part of this session, thank you very much for joining us. From wherever you were joining us, thank you very much for being part of the session. We are entering the 100 days from next week, the 100 days of commemorating the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. So we will have a ceremony here at the Johannesburg Holocaust Genocide Centre on the 7th of April. So please look out for the invitation to that commemorative ceremony on the 7th, and we'll share more details as we get closer to the time. So we will see you next week for that event. For now, thank you very much. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you for your attendance. Good night and good day wherever you are joining us from. Thank you very much. Until next time.
Thank you, Ndu.
Thank you.
Thank you, and good night, everyone.